Welcome to our afternoon session. I hope you all had a lovely time having lunch and posters in the sunshine. It was really good. I enjoyed some of those posters. Well, it gives me enormous pleasure now to introduce our Millie Dresselhaus Memorial Lecture. As many of you know, Millie was a really pioneering scientist, very famous person who people called her the Queen of Carbon. She knew everything about carbon. She was a really prolific scientist. Somebody was telling me she had over 1,000 papers, so you've got something to aim towards. But moreover, she was a wonderful member of the board of RACCAM. So for many years, she came here every year and was very strongly supportive of all the students who came to this event. And I think she's looking down on us from somewhere, wishing us well today, but she was really an inspiring woman, actually, really pioneering female scientist. So having given you a little bit of information about her, I would like to introduce our memorial lecture winner today. Our speaker is Christine Luscombe from the Okinawa Institute of Science and Technology in Japan. And she's been doing wonderful work on organic electronics for many years. And I first came to know her name about 20 years ago when I became a fellow of Trinity College where she had been already. So I saw her name there, but I never actually met you there. So it's wonderful to meet you today. Anyway, so Christine is going to talk to us today about advancing the frontiers of organic electronics through precision synthesis and molecular design. Please come.
Okay. All right, so thank you so much for the kind introduction. And I'd like to echo everyone's thanks to Tony and the organizers for this really super wonderful event. So as Judith as I was preparing for this presentation, I did want to look up all the things that Millie has achieved, and it was super humbling. As Judith mentioned, she's called the Queen of Carbon Science, and if you just look at the number of awards she's won, it's just such a huge list. And the 1,700 publications that she had. I figure if I can achieve maybe 10% of the things that she achieved in her lifetime, I'll be doing well. So I am feeling pretty nervous standing here giving this lecture today. I did have the opportunity to meet with her just one time. This was back when I was still at the University of Washington in Seattle. We had a newly established Clean Energy Institute at the time. So in 2013, she came to give the inaugural Clean Energy Institute interdisciplinary seminar. And as Judith mentioned, she was an incredible woman, super engaging. At this time, she was already in her 80s, and she still gave a really fabulous seminar. So I hope that I can really live up to all the things that she's achieved and give you a sense of the type of research that I do in my group. So she is the Queen of Carbon Science, and I will be talking about carbon-based materials today, not the type of materials that she worked on, but I'll be introducing you to the world of organic electronics today. But before I do that, I hope you'll indulge me in introducing my institute as well. So how many of you have heard of Okinawa Institute of Science and Technology? Some of you in the front row, but no, yeah, not too many people in the room. So Okinawa is based down here. It's a subtropical island of Japan. So Tokyo is up here. It's about a 2.5-hour flight from Tokyo. We are in fact closer to Taiwan, so Taiwan is a 45-minute flight. We are a very unique institute. We do like to call ourselves the KAUST of Japan, although we don't have as much funding as KAUST at all. But things like everything is in English. So the operating language of the institute is in English. We teach in English. About 80% of the faculty are non-Japanese faculty. We don't have any departments at our institute. And the whole idea is that we do interdisciplinary research at the university. We're a graduate student-only institute, so we have a 3-to-1 student-to-faculty ratio, and that's intentional so that there's close mentorship between the faculty member and the student. And then one aspect that makes it truly attractive is the funding model as well. So we are extremely fortunate to have direct funding from the Cabinet Office. So we have baseline funding for the university. And then finally, why is OIST in Okinawa? Why not in Tokyo or somewhere like that? And it was very much to do with where Okinawa is. So due to its complex history, it is the least privileged prefecture of Japan. And so OIST was built in Okinawa with the idea of accelerating economic growth on the island itself. So looking at where everybody comes from, we do have students from all over the place. But I was noticing that we really don't have anyone from the Arabian Peninsula right now. So for the students in the room, please do look us up and consider coming to visit us or come to do a postdoc with us. And I hope that all of you will have the occasion to visit. But being on a tropical island, it is in a truly beautiful location. My labs are not pictured here, but it's off on the side. But I do hope that many of you will consider coming to visit us. So as I was preparing to fly over here, I was thinking, well, I'm coming a really, really long way. Poor Okinawa is too small to show, so this is an approximate location. But from Okinawa to here, I was like, well, completely different cultures. We must not have many things in common. But actually, having read about the two locations, surprisingly, we do have some commonalities. One is, of course, the fact that both places are right by the sea. Admittedly, Okinawa is a natural island, whereas this not. Still, the fact that we are by the sea means that we have common marine heritages. And one of the things that really surprised me is actually the coral. So at least if Google is accurate, Google tells me that here in this region, you have the most diverse coral within the country. Okinawa, too, has a lot of coral around the island. And that has meant that many of the buildings built in the old ages are actually based on coral stone or limestone in particular. So here as well as a historical Shuri castle as well in Okinawa, it is made of coral stone, which has now, in both places, led to cement manufacturing being the leading manufacturing company in the area. Other commonalities, of course, is the local economy as well. Okinawa is already truly established as a tourism destination, but here, looking around, that's clearly where things are heading right now. So a lot of commonalities around the world, as His Royal Highness was mentioning, but with that commonalities also means that we both face a series of challenges related to climate change. So thinking about climate change, we had really great presentations that, where people are developing chemistries to address those things. But really, looking into the future, we are in a stage where we're just producing more and more carbon dioxide. And that's really is very much increasing. Admittedly, there are places in the world where the amount of CO2 being produced is going down. It's far outweighed by the production of CO2 elsewhere. So if you look at the distribution here, this is where the most amount of CO2 being produced increasing in kind of the red-orange regions. Blue regions are where it's going down. But overall, you'll see that global production is increasing. And this isn't just the climate challenge that we face, of course. And for me, as a polymer chemist, which is what I am, I also think about all the waste that we are producing, all the plastic waste generated, but also a lot of the electronic waste that we are generating. And so, one of the hats that I wear is, as of January, I'm the IUPAC International Union Pure and Applied Chemistry Vice President. And last year, we came out with this chemist mandate the IUPAC guiding principles of responsible chemistry. And so with climate change in mind, the call to action is to really do responsible innovation. There's other things like behaving ethically, communicating and collaborating broadly as much as possible, making sure that all your science is accurate and all your science has integrity as well. But there's a number of things that we touch upon related to this chemist mandate, a call of action to all the scientists in the world. And thinking about where my science fits in, I think for today what I'll be talking about, what it touches upon more is sort of thinking about responsible innovation. Innovation in chemistry, or it could be science, which maximizes the benefits for people and the planet while minimizing, mitigating unintended consequences. But also over here, thinking about safety, security, and sustainability as we move towards more of an uncertain world, making sure that we do science that really fits in this mold. And so as chemists or as material scientists, there's a lot of things that we can do in order to help achieve these things. Just examples of things that we heard about today, you can think about developing better catalysts. You can, as was seen this morning, advancing energy storage. And there's a whole series of things that we can work on. But really, at the basis of all these discoveries is the design of functional materials. And I think this is all of us work on the design of functional materials. And we should keep on trying to address all these issues as we move on to do that. So, of course, there are many types of materials that you can work on. So for this morning, there are a lot of examples for inorganic materials. But in my case, my material of choice is semiconducting polymers. So now I'll transition to introducing you the semiconducting polymers. So here are the three people who really pioneered this research area. They were awarded the Nobel Prize in Chemistry for this back in 2000. But Alan McDiarmid, Hideki Shirakawa, and Alan Heeger are very much thought of being the fathers of semiconducting polymers. And I would really encourage many of you to go and look at this paper. So the original paper that talked about the conducting polymer was published in 1977 in Chemical Communications. But 25 years after that, ChemCom also had a special focus article that talked about the history of the discovery. And it's a really interesting story. So you had a polymer chemist, Hideki Shirakawa, inorganic chemist, Alan McDiarmid, and a physicist, Alan Heeger, coming together. And the article talks about the challenges they had in communicating, like physicists saying one thing, a chemist saying one thing. We're using different words to talk about the same thing and having challenges there. And there's a couple of funny stories in there. For example, Alan Heeger kept on talking about SNX, sulfur nitride-based polymer, but McDiarmid heard SNX, small n, so he thought that they were talking about tin, which of course they were not. Other stories also include the following. Shirakawa, he was having communication problems with a Korean researcher in his group. And this Korean researcher misunderstood what he was being told, so he ended up using 1,000 times excess of catalyst than you normally would. And this turned out to be a super happy accident because it's this accident that allowed them to make this silvery film that has led to the development of this entire field related to semiconducting polymers. So just looking at a little bit more detail about what they actually did, they made the polymer polyacetylene, and the really classical experiment that they performed was to do polyacetylene with various halogens, chlorine, bromine, iodine. And you can see that with increasing dopant, you could obtain a huge increase in conductivity. And in the case of when iodine was used, they actually achieved a 7-order magnitude of increase in conductivity, which is where now you're starting to match the conductivity of metals. So I just want to highlight this story in particular for the students in the audience. Like, these kind of accidents can really lead to major discoveries. So I hope you'll embrace the accidents that you might have in your lab as well. But of course, since this original discovery, the field has really, really blossomed. And I just want to highlight one particular paper by Andy. This is the paper that inspired me to go into this research area. But since the discovery of polyacetylene, now we have polymers that can emit light, and they're now used in a huge variety of applications, which are shown on this slide. So just looking at the applications people work on these days, people are developing semiconducting polymers for flexible displays, transistors, photovoltaics. A huge growing area is in the area of bioelectronics and electronic skin. But the list of applications for these materials is really, really huge these days. So given all the work that is going on, what do I do? And my focus, being from Andy's group, my focus is really actually very much on the synthesis side of things. I really focus on the organic and polymer synthesis that enables these materials. So just looking at the types of conjugated polymers out there now, these days the structures are hugely complicated. We're well beyond the age where people were working on polyacetylene. So up here, a polythiophene, but you can see that the complexity is just getting more and more and more. So given this complex scenario, the thing that we're trying to do is to use synthesis as a tool to really try to understand the materials better. So just to take a step back, I am hugely simplifying, and I know there are a lot of people who work on inorganic materials and crystals, so I am hugely simplifying right now. But what makes polymers really complicated is that it's a hugely messy system. Whereas many of the other materials classes like metals, ceramics, they can be amorphous, but they can also be crystalline, in which case they have long-range order. And that long-range order means that there's a lot of characterization tools that you can use in order to try and see what is happening in the material. And of course, defects really define the properties that you see, but even the defects are oftentimes a little bit easier to understand. In contrast, though, now we look at polymers. So if you look at a polymer, you'll be shown a really neat structure, a very nice chemical structure that supposedly shows what your structure is. But what you have to remember is that actually, when they're drawing a polymer, we're not dealing with single molecular weight species. There's a range of molecular weights that we're dealing with. Even though we often draw the polymer chain to be linear, actually our chemistry is not that good. And in reality, within the linear mixture, you might have some branches, you might have some cross-linked structures, but we can't really tell too much from the characterization tools that we have. And then finally, even thinking about defects, so I'm showing you kind of two cases here. In both cases, there are 3 defects amongst the 3 chains. So in this case, 1 per chain. Here, 3 on one chain and none on the other. But using characterization, we cannot tell apart the difference between these 2 samples. All we can really do is always talk about averages of molecular weights or chemical structures, and that makes it a bit harder to do really careful structure property relationship studies for polymers. And it's not just the strain structure that complicates things. If you now look at a polymer morphology, quite often they're drawn to be semi-crystalline. So you have these crystalline domains and you have these amorphous domains. And the crystalline domain, we can use similar techniques that are used in inorganic materials, crystalline materials to characterize. So we can use X-ray, so we can use GWAX, and other techniques to look at those. But then the amorphous domain is very much blind to us. It's all about guesswork. And to be honest, for most polymer applications, this is fine. Like if you're dealing with a plastic bag made of polyethylene, who cares about this stuff? But when it comes to electronic applications, we do want to know. We do not want to know where the defects are. We do want to know how to control the defects. And it's important to understand how those defects actually affect the properties that we have. So the question then becomes, well, how can we deal with this mess? Like, how can we tease the details out of it? And there's two things you could do. One is to really improve the characterization tools that are available to you. So one thing that you can do is to really dive into all the different characterizations and improve those. And there are many people in the world doing that type of work. But in my case, as a chemist, as a synthetic chemist, what I really decided to focus on was the following. Trying to make much more well-defined materials with no defects, or if I'm going to introduce a defect, be able to introduce them in very specific positions. Deal with materials that where the polymer chains have the same lengths and molecular weights, and use these really well-defined materials to then you do structure property relationship studies so to get a better handle of what's actually happening in the materials. So with that kind of big backdrop, I've had a very long overarching goal in my research group, and that is really to try and address this following question. Can we design and synthesize semiconducting polymers with the level of precision that nature can? So if you think about proteins and DNA, they have absolute molecular weights, very precise molecular weights. Not just that, but they have sequence specificity. You can get the sequences in the right way. But synthesizing materials the same way that nature does is actually not very efficient at all. So another thing that we think about relates to sustainability as well, is to think about, well, can we do the synthesis efficiently and also in a much more environmental manner? And after making the materials, we do take it on to applications as well. So we'll do the thin film morphology studies, and we'll look at the properties of the materials as well. But really, at the foundation of it is having access to these very precise materials. So for the rest of the talk, what I'd like to do is to give you a snapshot of some of the work that we do. I'll start off by talking about the precision synthesis of semiconducting polymers. And then I'll give you an example of where we're trying to go in terms of doing more sustainable syntheses of materials. And then finally, to show you some of the work that we've done in using these materials to try and understand them a lot better. Okay, so moving on to the synthesis. So really, despite the complicated structures that you might see, what all of them have in common is that, well, it's a connection of rings. So when it comes to the polymer synthesis, what we're doing is dealing with the chemistry that connects all these rings. And so just showing you a very schematic structure, typically we'll have two monomers, blue and the red here. The blue would have halogens, X is a halogen, and then the other monomer will have an organometallic species. And then you throw in a catalyst, and then you'll connect the rings. And the way that we design this is we have these functional groups. They're selected such that they can only react with each other. They cannot react with itself. The only way it can react with is each other. And that's partly how you get that sequence control, where you just get blue, red, blue, red, blue, red all over again. Admittedly, the synthesis does go wrong. So sometimes you do get blue, blue going together, red, red coupling together. But for the most part, you do get this alternating structure. I won't go into the mechanism here at all, but just to show you that there is a metal catalyst playing a major role in order to enable that coupling. So usually when you do this synthesis, you do end up with extremely broad molecular weight distributions. So chain lengths are all over the place, and it's generally quite a bit of a mess. So when I started my independent career, I was really, again, inspired by nature and thinking about thinking about the molecular catwalk. So in nature, you can have these microtubules, and then there's these motoproteins that bring a cargo in, and it brings one cargo at a time by having these sticky feet at the bottom and also these sticky hands. So I had this image, thinking, well, maybe this could be the metal catalyst, and this is my growing polymer chain. Maybe I can control the monomer growth, or the polymer growth rather, by having this catalyst that can really bring one monomer at a time to this growing chain. That way I can start to control the molecular weight, and also in the future, we'd be able to get sequence specificity as well. So the chemistry that we developed in my group is the following, of attaching the nickel onto this growing polymer chain, and by doing so, we do get this one catalyst addition at a time. And I won't go into detail on this slide, but just to show you that here, this is the catalyst that we made, monomer addition, and the polymer grows really well. And this is a graph that only a polymer chemist would be happy about. But what this really shows is that you have perfect control over the molecular weight. The squares are the experimental data points. The solid line is the theoretical expected molecular weight. So you can see we're controlling the molecular weight. There's other things like molecular weight dispersity. So dispersity of 1 would be perfect. In our case, we get 1.1, 1.2, which is good from a polymer synthesis point of view. But there's other aspects too. We're able to get 100% initiation efficiency. What that means is that every single chain has this end group on it. And there's other things like I mentioned defects in polymers. We're able to make what's called 100% resio regular. In other words, our 0% defect materials using the synthesis that we've developed. So the synthesis works great. And oftentimes I get asked, well, who cares? Who cares if the synthesis is great? Maybe if the material functions, who cares about the defects and so on? So I just want to show you some quick slides to show that actually having a well-defined material does indeed help with improving the properties of at least of electronic materials. So just showing you some things. This is a UV vis trace of a typical polymer, and enhancement in the shoulder peak right here tells us that we have greater crystallinity. And it's pretty amazing, like even if you're just dealing with 98% resio regular, 99% resio regular, that 1% resio regularity difference can actually make a big change in the crystallinity that we have. And of course, greater crystallinity means greater charge mobility. So it's better from a property point of view. Other things too, like given that the polymer chain is so long, like who cares what the end groups are doing? But actually, it turns out that the end groups do really matter in the case of electronic polymers. So if you think about the crystalline domain of the polymer chain's going back and forth in the crystal. And the chain end can end up in the middle of the crystal. And if it's in the middle, then it's disrupting electronic transport. And so we were able to do some studies to show that if the end group is similar to the main chain, so the more similar the end group structure is to the main chain of the polymer, the greater the electronic performance can be. Other things too about the length and dispersity. Do you really need all your chains to be exactly the same length? And for these types of polymers, it turns out that it does really matter to have the same length. So again, using the same model, you have a polymer chain going back and forth, back and forth. And I mentioned that having the N group in the middle of the crystal is bad. So ideally, you actually want the N groups at the edges of these crystals. So if you synthesize polymer chains that are either exactly the length of your crystal, or twice, or even 3 times, if you design it such that the N groups are on these edges, then you can enhance your crystallinity and therefore improve the charge transport through your materials. Having access to these materials hasn't just meant better performing materials, but it's also allowed us to do much more careful structure property relationship studies that we couldn't do before. And I won't highlight all our collaborations that we've had, but I'll just highlight this example, which was a collaboration with Lin Lu at Princeton University. So looking at this semi-crystalline polymer cartoon diagram again, you have crystalline domains, and then you have these amorphous domains. We know charge transport is fastest in the crystal domains because that's where the chains are aligned well. You have fast transport along the chain and good hopping of charges through the chains. What we didn't necessarily understand, though, is how charges got from crystal to crystal. Like, to get macroscopic charge transport, they do have to hop from crystal to crystal. And how is it doing that? And what we were able to show in this study is the importance of tight chains. So you need to have physical chains connecting all these crystals. And if that tight chain fraction reaches a certain limit, then you see a huge boost in charge mobility, and you can get really great performance out of your material. So being able to do studies such as these, you can only do if you have carefully controlled molecular weight polymers. Okay, so that was kind of an introduction to the precision synthesis that we've done, and we continue to do a lot more work in that area as well. But I want to move on to the second topic now, which is talking about doing more sustainable syntheses of our materials. So again, I'm showing you this slide again, just highlighting the complexity of the materials. And this complexity has meant that we have amazingly high-performing materials now. You can get a 20% photovoltaic efficiency. We can get charge mobilities that really match amorphous silicon, but that has to come at the cost of synthetic complexity. And I'm just showing you one particular example here. So our field is not known for very imaginative naming, but this is a polymer known as D18. But this is a polymer that will give you an 18% power conversion efficiency in a solar cell. But you'll see the synthesis is long. You probably can't see it from the back, but it's super duper long. It is an over 15-step synthesis that you need to do, and unfortunately, many of the steps are irreproducible. So in terms of sustainable syntheses, what we've been trying to do is to develop chemistries that really simplify and reduce the number of steps you have to do. And looking at all of these reactions, admittedly, there are many, many chemistries that we could work on. But again, from a polymer chemist point of view, the one that we focus on is this very end bit, which is the polymerization step. So here, this is a scheme I showed you earlier. 2 halogens, 2 organometallic species, and you get your polymer. And the reaction that we've been working on is called DARP, direct arylation polymerization. And the way that this works is instead of having the organometallic species, you just have hydrogen. So basically, you have a completely unfunctionalized monomer that you can connect together to make your polymer. And the reason that this has become now a very popular reaction is because, well, you don't have to do any function, you don't have to do any additional steps to make the monomer. So going from here to here is usually a 2-step synthesis, but not having to do that reduces the number of steps. There's other issues too. So normally, these organometallic reagents are hugely toxic. So organotin is toxic, and also we have to use a stoichiometric amount of these metals. So not having to use that really simplifies the polymerization and, for want of a better term, makes the reaction a little bit greener. So our contribution to the field is, well, doing DARP, but also doing it in a controlled way. We've been able to develop chemistries that allow us to do the DARP, but still be able to make these defect-free polymers. One step even greater would be the following. So here, I still have 2 halogens, but even better would be the following, having 2 hydrogens here. But then here, the selectivity becomes a real problem. Previously, I mentioned that the selectivity was governed by the fact that you had these functional groups that made sure, kind of controlled the coupling. But here, when you don't have any functional groups, how do you still make sure that you end up with an alternating copolymer? And so we've been able to do a lot of work in this area as well. I won't bore you with the synthetic details, but just suffice to say that we've been able to develop these reactions where you can start with these unfunctionalized monomers and be able to make high molecular weight, low defect semiconducting polymers. Okay, so I know there's not a lot of synthetic chemists in the room, so I'll switch gears now and talk about the final thing that I want to present today, which is to do with really probing the thin film microstructure so that we can further our understanding of how semiconducting polymers function. So I showed you this image before. This is your typical cartoon diagram that we draw for your semicrystalline system. And just to reiterate, before you have your crystalline domains, and then you have your amorphous domains. But I also mentioned that we can't actually see these things. So we're just imagining that this is what it looks like, and I hope I'll be able to show by the end that actually our inability to see has caused us to make the wrong assumptions. So based on this semicrystalline film, the cartoon diagram that we all draw, the picture I show here has been our general understanding of how charges move through these materials. So you have these crystalline domains again, and in the crystalline domains, your chains are linear, they're planar. You have fast charge transport along the chain and fast hopping in the pi-pi stacking direction. And because we've always assumed that this is where charges move through quickly, the general design criteria for high charge mobility materials has been to design for high crystallinity. So we try to maximize crystallinity as much as possible. But because we weren't able to see this, we wanted to try and visualize some of these things. And here I want to highlight our collaborators, Alberto Saleo from Stanford University and Frank Spano at Temple University, who have really allowed us to see what is happening. So Alberto Saleo, he does a lot of things, but one of the things that he does is known as charge modulation spectroscopy. Here you have your polymer thin film right in the middle. There's some polarized filters, and you pass IR light through the film. So really, it's basically a fancy IR spectroscopy technique. But what's also nice about it is that you can actually put in a device in here, and so you can watch how your IR spectrum changes with more charges going through the material. And what's also fun about collaborations is that now Frank can take the spectra that we get and calculate the degree of delocalization of charge through the materials. And admittedly, I don't understand too much of how he does that, but he's able to take the spectra and tell me, based on the intensity and the positioning of the peaks, how much delocalization there is. So starting with a very classical polymer known as P3HT or poly-3-hexylthiophene, this was the material that we started off looking at. And in this case, we found that, the behavior was the cartoon diagram that we drew. And in particular, what we saw was a molecular weight dependent behavior. So when you have very short molecular weights, the degree of delocalization is primarily within the chain and not much delocalization in the pi-pi stacking direction. If you increase the molecular weight, that behavior changes now. Now you have delocalization in the chain, but also you start to see delocalization in the pi-pi stacking direction. So this kind of confirms what we typically draw, which is the following. When you have short chains, it's 1D behavior, but when you get to longer chains, it's 2D behavior, really highlighting the role of the crystals. When the molecular weight continues to grow, we actually reach a region where the degree of delocalization doesn't change, but the charge mobility continues to go up. And this is where the tight chains are really coming into play to affect the charge mobility that we see. But regardless, for a classical polymer like P3HT, the cartoon diagram we draw is accurate in terms of describing the charge mobility. But based on this, we were like, okay, let's try to look at more interesting polymers. And here I'd like to introduce to you a polymer known as IDTBT. It's a polymer that was popularized by Ian McCullough at Princeton University, but this is the general structure here. You'll see there's a very fused ring and very, very long alkyl chains coming off it. And when this polymer was originally published, it was a polymer that really confused the field. It was a polymer that gave remarkably high charge mobilities, 3 to 5, but even up to 10 centimeters squared per volt second has been reported, and that's high for a polymer. But what was weird is that when you did things like X-ray or GWAX, there was not much structure to be seen. It was a seemingly amorphous polymer, and yet it was giving you really high charge mobilities. So going against the general design criteria that we have for these materials. So you're like, okay, this is the polymer that we're going to tackle to try and see what was happening. So here again, this is the polymer that I just showed you. But what we decided to do was to make a series of these polymers where the only thing that we're changing is the co-monomer that we're adding. This huge fused ring is still a common factor in all our polymers. When we synthesize these three series, we saw something that was very, very strange about this one particular polymer in the middle. And that was to do with the physical properties of it that we saw. So polymers, semiconducting polymers, being designed to be more crystalline than amorphous, they tend to be very brittle. And usually what we isolate because of that brittleness are powders. Like, well, you filter them and it just kind of falls apart into hard powders. But that one polymer that we made was actually very squishy. It had a completely different texture. And that made us look at the mechanical properties of these materials. And what was intriguing about these mechanical properties was the following. So again, because normally semiconducting polymers are brittle, the elastic moduli that we measure are typically in the 1 gigapascal regime. But these polymers, they were showing an order of magnitude lower elastic modulus, showing that they were less stiff, confirming kind of the amorphous nature that people were seeing using X-ray spectroscopy. But there is one other number that we looked at, and this is the crack onset strain. So here, you make a thin film, you pull the film, and you just visually watch when the film starts to crack. And so in 2 of them, it cracked straight away. But that squishy one that I told you about earlier, that was stretching a lot more. And again, being so used to cartoon images and being stuck in the mold of thinking about this particular image, we were like, okay, the reason that it's doing that, it must be because this model is holding true. Like when you pull the material, you must be stretching out the amorphous chains, and that must be why we're seeing these mechanical properties that we're seeing. And we convinced ourselves that that must be true based on DFT modeling as well. So that squishy polymer that I talked about when we did DFT modeling, it was showing a lot of torsion, a lot of twist. And so we were like, okay, this twist must be making it more amorphous and making the chains more coiled. And that must be why we're seeing the properties that we're seeing. So we were convincing ourselves of this, but at the same time in the back of our heads, that argument wasn't making sense necessarily. Because normally, if you have a material that can stretch more easily, that means you have more entanglement, so the chains are entangling. And if it's entangling, your elastic modulus should actually be going up. So you should be getting a stiffer material. But that was not holding true at all. So there is just something about this class of polymers, well, with this IDT monomer, this generally wasn't making very much sense. So I'm not going to go into the detail of all the characterization that we did, but ultimately, through a variety of characterizations, including GWAX, UV-Vis, and additional DFT calculations that we performed, what became true was that the cartoon diagrams that we draw just are not true. And in particular, these IDT monomers, because you have this very planarized monomer with hairy side chains coming off, the more accurate description of these is really hairy planks or rods. So regardless of the twist that we have in the polymer backbone, in the squishy one, you have a hairy needle-like structure. So the core of it is still very linear, but what's changing is that because it's more twisted, the side chains are spiraling out. So you have 360-degree coverage of side chains along that rigid polymer backbone. But then in the original IDT-BT, this one, this is more like a hairy plank. The polymer is planar, and then that means that the side chains just come off at the sides. So through all our failures and through all our characterization, a different picture was emerging, that these polymers were not the spaghetti that we draw, but really kind of more rigid planks that we had. And our collaborator, Alberto Sileo, actually confirmed this using a different TEM technique as well, which is that the way that we draw these polymers is really just simply wrong. And the way that you should envision is these kind of needle-like structures or plank-like structures. So given that this is now the morphology that we have, well, how do charges actually move through these different types of materials? If we have a different microstructure, we need a different model for charge transport too. So here we collaborated with additional people doing MD simulations. And what MD simulations confirmed was what we were thinking, which is that these polymers are extremely linear, and all these side chains are really kind of covering up that linear backbone. But then if you have this needle-like structure, how do you actually get macroscopic charge transport through an entire film? Like, it might be fast along the chain, but at some point it needs to hop to another chain to be able to get from electrode to electrode. And it turns out that what's really enabling that is the following. So the acceptor doesn't have any side chains, so there's a little bit of space. So at that space, these chains cross at 90 degrees. And these crossings are not that frequent. It's only 1 in every 10 that has that cross. But that cross is enough that you have fast charge transport along the chain. At the cross, it hops to the next chain, goes fast again. And so you end up with more of this zigzag motion. We wanted to not just, again, imagine this, but to confirm this spectroscopically as well. So here again, we use charge modulation spectroscopy. And here, it really confirmed this idea that was developing, which is that these rigid rod polymers are very much 1D transporters, unlike the classical polymer P3HT that we have. And these days, the model we have, well, ultimately, it is a polymer. It's not a plank. So the idea that we have is, OK, we're moving away from spaghetti, and we kind of have more of a fettuccine-like structure. So you have these wide ribbons, and these wide ribbons are weaving through. So this might not seem like a big discovery to you, for at least from us there. It completely changes the way that we think about how we design for high charge mobility. So the fact that now these materials are more like 1D transporters really changes the way that we try to design for future polymers. So I guess I talked a lot today, but I will actually conclude now. But I know that many of you in this room are material scientists, but I hope that I was able to show you that there's a lot of things that organic synthesis and polymer synthesis can do in order to really untangle the mess that we have, specifically for polymers. And I think the Nobel Prize winners, Heeger, McDermott, and Shiraka really showed it too. But in order to make big discoveries, you do need to work collaboratively. So I hope that the students in the room will take this to heart, communicate and collaborate, make friends at this meeting in order to broaden your network as much as possible. And in particular, in my case, it really is going all the way from synthesis and working with device physicists that enables the research that we do. I touched upon the chemist mandate or the scientist mandate earlier, but in order to do all that work, it does really take a village. So again, build your network and communicate and collaborate together. And then finally, I can only ever dream of matching what Millie Dresselhaus was able to achieve, but I hope that through my presentation, I was able to showcase a different aspect of carbon science as well. But finally, to end, big thanks to Andrew Holmes. He was actually my PhD advisor, and without him, I would not be standing here today. But also a big thank you to past and current group members. And again, I hope that you'll come and visit Okinawa someday. Thank you.
For a wonderful talk. I think we all really learned so much, and it was really accessible, I think, to all of us. So thank you very much for a wonderful talk.